Hey guys, this is Dion DiCristofaro. I'm from the SAP's S4HANA Finance COE, and I'm here to talk to you guys today about SAP GL options here. So, a lot of the discussion we've had with customers, certainly over the last few years here, have been all around this concept of what's going to the universal journal, that one place to go that has all my financial information that I can easily report on and do all of my analytics here. But typically one of the questions that I get all the time is, I'm running SAP today, I run classic or new GL, what's the differences? What's the increased value, if you will, by moving to a solution like this? So I thought I'd spend a little bit of time kind of walking you through that and showing you what that exactly is. So I kind of wrote it up on the board here to kind of make it super simple and easy here. We'll just kind of walk through. So for those who don't know, right, SAP, certainly the ledger has been around for certainly 20 plus years out there, and pretty much pre-2005 we had what was called our classic general ledger system. It's been the one that started around within R3, even to some extent back within R2, and that ledger basically existed until around 2005, where solution ECC 5.0 came out, and that's when we introduced what was called the new general ledger system. So we added some new values and some information as part of that. Then move forward here, finally within end of 2014, really beginning of 2015, when we officially deployed S4, we introduced what was called the Universal Journal. So what I want to focus on is kind of comparing and contrasting the differences and ultimately showing you the value within the Universal Journal that you can get. And the three areas we're going to focus on is, what are the fundamental differences within the ledgers, what are the fundamental differences with the data, and what are the big differences as it relates to reporting out here today. So let me kind of walk you through. So the initial system that was created was our general ledger back in, again, 20 plus years ago, and it was a single ledger system here, meaning there was only one respective ledger inside the system. I couldn't do multi types of reporting. I couldn't do multi-book. I couldn't do a GAAP and IFRS. Basically, it was one ledger and one accounting treatment. If you wanted to have additional accounting treatments, you had to implement what was called special ledgers at the time here. And the problem was, special ledgers were great in one hand that you could get the reporting that you wanted, but the bad part about a special ledger is that you actually had to create a bunch of the reporting. So there was no out-of-the-box reports, there's no out-of-the-box content. You're basically creating a brand new table and you have to create reporting against it there. But that's what we had typically for phase one within the classic area around ledgers, which is a single. Now in 2005, when we introduced basically new GL, we added some new functionality. So basically the limitation of the single ledger was eliminated, and we introduced what was called as multi-ledger concept. And so we have now what's called parallel ledgers that existed inside SAP. So now I could have, through a standard set of configurations and everything else behind the scenes there, I'm able to actually create one set of books for IFRS, one set of books on GAAP, one set of books on tax, and as an end user, you can help define and customize or really configure the system to help you actually do that. A couple of the key values, again, the big driver of this was the parallel ledger concept. And then we also introduced the concept of what was called document splitting. Document splitting is nothing more than being able to kind of have the ability to look in a single company code inside the application and be able to kind of break out that company code. Obviously, we can always do that between multiple P&Ls by different product lines, but if I wanted to take an existing company code and split it out into multiple balance sheets, if you will here, so maybe I'm being measured on working capital or cash or something else behind the scenes, and I needed to have all my balance sheets segmented out by something else out there, most notably a profit center, that's what document splitting would help us do there. You don't have to implement it, it's an option that you had there. So that was it. So moving over to new GL gave us that new functionality. And then finally, when we moved over to the Universal Journal, we inherited a lot of the functionality of the new GL. So we continue to have the parallel ledgers, the document splitting. But one new thing that we've added out there, we've added the opportunity now to have what's called an Appendix Ledger out there. So it's another ledger in one case similar to what a parallel ledger does, but the idea of an Appendix Ledger is a separate ledger that allows us to capture small amounts of detail. So typically with a parallel ledger concept, I'm duplicating the data. So I have the data basically in my tables twice, if you will here, and then I make small adjustments to get the differences, if you will here. Go forward, we now have the option to continue doing what we were doing, but now have this Appendix Ledger concept, which we can now bring inside the system here. and be able to store different types of information. So specifically, and it's incremental information, so we're not duplicating everything, we're just holding the differences. And one of the areas this becomes very valuable here, certainly for the future around the universal journal, is the ability to start doing things what we call simulations, or doing predicted information here, right? So wouldn't it be great to run certain types of processes? So think about allocations as an example. In the traditional world, I may run an allocation here, but if I wanted to run it every day, I'd have to post it, reverse it, post it, reverse it. Nobody wants all that stuff sitting inside their respective ledger here. Go forward here, we're using Appendix Ledgers, we may have the opportunity to go through and do something and say, hey, during the month, I want to run an allocation every day inside the application. As I execute that allocation, it actually gets put into a different layer. So it's not what's called my leading ledger inside the system. It's in a different key, if you will hear, one of my Appendix Ledgers called a simulated ledger. So the idea when it's simulated, I can run it. And when I run it again, I delete out the old information here. So huge flexibility. This is really the vision where SAP is going in the future here, to be able to do certain types of functions with this Appendix Ledger, both to predict and to simulate here. So currently big value, and you're going to see a lot more of this in the future. All right, second area, what's so valuable? It's all around data. Right? So when you think about data, going back to a classic GL today here, it's very different here, right? When you think about a classic GL, two things first. One is that the data was always summarized. So when you think about running a report or doing something on a traditional database, if you will here, right? I couldn't go against a line item table. I couldn't go against all those detailed records. Why? The transaction would never finish here. So what SAP, of course, had to do is we had line item tables, and we had summary or total tables in the system here. So we created everything from a summarized point of view, and then all of the reporting that you would use would typically go against these summarized views. So it allowed the report to run and come back in a reasonable amount of time. It was good from a performance perspective, but you're missing information. You didn't have all the detail that you wanted inside the application here. So if you're missing information, it only told you part of the story, and ultimately you were forced to go somewhere else out there. In addition, the data that you were looking at from a ledger perspective was mostly FI data. Now there was limited CO types of objects and information in there from time to time, but it wasn't complete here. So meaning if it was a transaction, meaning I posted a journal entry and I posted it to a cost center, I would get that information. But if I did a CO allocation from one object to the other, that would never be reflected here. So again, it's some CO information, but I'd say it was limited. Secondly, from a reporting perspective, if I wanted to look at things like profitability or fixed asset detail or material ledger information, none of that information existed here, right? We had different areas within SAP. COPA, profitability was a separate area in the system, fixed assets was a separate area, and that's where I would actually go. So I could run GL reports here to get one view of my information, but the granularity and the detail that I needed wasn't there, and I was forced to have to go to another area inside the system. And then lastly, the data. The data that sits inside the system, even back then, is incomplete, right? And part of this incompleteness, a great example here might have been around, let's say, fixed assets information. So I could go run basically a report from a GL perspective and get all my acquisition value. I could get all my accumulated values, right? I could get all my depreciation expense. But that's only by the GL account. I couldn't see any of that information by the asset number. And quite often, if you went and looked in the SAP system, you would even notice there's a field for the asset number in a lot of the reports, but you couldn't see or do anything with that information there. It was never populated here. SAP's changing that, right? The way it's going to work go forward is a lot of that dimensionality is now going to be populated go forward here. But anyway, that was what was wrong really with the classic model. And if you kind of move forward here, really even on the new GL, moving over there, pretty much everything is still the same there, right? We haven't made any major changes in that respective manner here. The only difference is that we do capture a few additional CO objects inside the system. So if you went to new GL, we have a segment field and some other ways to manage, look at the information. That's now being captured there. We've also had some newer derivations that can help bring some of that information in. But again, mostly still incomplete inside the application here. So still missing profitability, fixed assets, and material ledger information. And again, the data, what I would say, is really incomplete. Now lastly, moving back over here to the Universal Journal, that is where we have made a huge significant change here. So a couple things. One is that the summary or the aggregate tables that were there behind the scenes, They're gone. They've been eliminated, and strategically so, right? We want you to go to one single place inside the system to capture all the detail, and that's the Universal Journal. This is bringing in all the line item information. So when you run reports inside the system, right, you may run some of the same kind of standard reports you had over here, but it's now going to go against a line item table, and it may only, if you only have 3 or 4 dimensions you want to run a report on, it's going to only bring up those 3 or 4 dimensions here. But know that as you need to drill down and get to more detailed information inside the application, it would actually be there. So it's taking line item details, allowing you to aggregate that on the fly. Secondly, and of course, which is huge, everything's there. Within the Universal Journal, we're going to capture all of our financials, external information, CO management information, right? Profitability, which is all of our COPA detail, fixed assets, and material ledger information now can directly exist within the Universal Journal. So imagine this as an end user, one place to go, right? One place to go to do all the types of reporting and analysis that I need. I don't have to jump over to these different modules, different areas. I have one physical table that's now being presented to me to be able to easily manage what's going on within my business here. And lastly, I didn't write it here, but yeah, the information, the dimensionality is now complete inside the system. So this is huge. So the scenario I talked about before, I want to be able to look at a general ledger account for asset information and see everything by asset number. I want to be able to go out there and look at work in process information and see it by either that project or that production order or some other types of detail out there, right? That missing dimensionality that most people have is now there inside the application. You know, think about it as a good example. If you ever went through the process inside SAP of creating a sales order, delivering those goods, and then ultimately billing that respective customer out there, quite often, if you looked at the old documents within the existing ledgers of the past here, you could see certain information. I could see a goods receipt or a goods issue, and I could see it by the product, but I didn't know the customer. I didn't know the sales order, right? Same thing on the billing side. If I did the billing document out there, I may understand which customer it is, but I wouldn't necessarily always see all the information associated with the products. Basically, it was incomplete dimensionality. And again, that's why we had to go to these other solutions like profitability analysis to get those details. That has completely changed. Go forward within the Universal Journal, we now have a complete look at all of that dimensionality here. So when things post from the goods issue to the billing document, everything is there that allows the end user now to do very easily on-the-fly reporting and analytics. All right, and so that brings me to my last topic here. Reporting as it relates, again, to our different GLs here. And again, pretty much for the first classic and new, it's pretty much been the same. So when you think, and I broke this out into kind of 2 areas. So when you think about reporting within SAP, there's a couple different areas. We have what's called, I call, direct or real-time reporting. So in the past, if you ever wanted that real-time direct reporting inside the system, you typically had to run something around a report writer, report painter report, right? You had to do ABAP. You had to run a GUI-based transaction or a report inside the system here. And while you may have gotten some results that you needed, quite often the user experience of it, the details of what you want, or even remember that up here, the data was probably incomplete, didn't have all the information that you wanted there. And quite often what people ended up doing with that, of course, is that they made the choice to start taking this information and pushing it somewhere else out there because they didn't want to be able to, because they couldn't get the reporting that they wanted. But again, if you had to have direct real-time reporting, those were your only options, and I'd say they were fairly limited. Now, what did most customers typically do? So I talked about direct real-time reporting, but what were most customers typically doing? And I already started to talk about that, right? They were typically extracting information out of SAP, right? Taking this information that exists inside the system and pushing it over to a business warehouse, to a data warehouse, right? To Microsoft Excel or other types of reporting platforms and solutions here. And that's where they were doing the work here. So think about that. A lot of work, a lot of duplication of the data, a lot of movement of that data. It was a huge challenge for lots of our customers, right? And then lastly, think about things like, just within finance, things like budgeting and consolidations here. Again, prior to where we are today, where would you do that? It would have to be outside the solution. We would have to extract that information and maybe put it to a data warehouse or maybe send it directly to one of those reporting solutions, but that's where you had to go to be able to see all of the proper information here. Now, what has changed again? So certainly that was pretty much the same model on both the classic GL as well as the new GL inside the system. But how we move forward here, what we've done moving forward here with Universal Journal is we've made a fundamental change. So now that all this data exists inside the system with the right dimensionality, with all of my different sort of modules of information sitting in that Universal Journal, I can now directly access that information. So how? Right? We have a variety of new Fiori content that users can see. We have what's called Analysis for Office, a great Excel front end that allows me to directly access the Universal Journal, pick and choose the dimensions that I want, and be able to report on anything I want. So go back to that example I just said a second ago around profitability, right? Wouldn't it be great if they could go into a single table, drag the customer, drag the product that they want out there, drag the time frame, and be able to get a gross margin report on the fly? Think about all those ad hoc questions that basically users get throughout the month here. Huge value in that there. In addition to tools like Analysis for Office, certainly Lumira, and even third-party tools. So since everything is embedded on top of this, or within this HANA platform here, there's a lot of other solutions that can directly help access, or that can directly access this information here. Super valuable here. And lastly, again, talk about the typical reporting go forward with the Universal Journal. It's directly out of the system. The idea of having to take my information and move it to a different platform can really go away. Now, there's many use cases. We won't talk about that today on why you still may want to do that, but you now have the option to be able to have all your information directly on one platform and not have to move the information at all anymore. One or single version of the truth. And then last thing, when you think about things like budgeting and consolidation, certainly with the Universal Journal, big changes here, right? We have now what's called embedded budgeting and planning and consolidations all in one platform here. So what SAP is trying to do, simplify the landscape. Have one single table, one single system that you need to go to be able to give you the reporting and the analytics that you need. So I want to say thank you for taking the time to listen and to be able to watch this video. Let me know if you have any feedback or comments. Certainly if you want to like this within LinkedIn, that would be great, or forward it along. Be mostly appreciated. Thank you and have a great day.